Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Tiger-Heli on the NES. Tiger-Heli has really simple controls, but the movement in it is really sluggish. It's like there's more slowdown than you would normally see from an NES game. It just kind of feels a little bit different with this one when you're trying to move your helicopter around and line up your shots. The controls are easy to use. It's just B button shoots, A button does your special attack, and the D-pad moves you around. The special attack is kind of odd. It's a bomb, which isn't too surprising, but at times it'll just sort of go off automatically. Like you're going to get hit, and instead of getting hit, it'll just shoot the bomb off. It's very strange. I think it only happens when you get hit from the side, but it just kind of feels like it'll randomly happen for you. You do have a few power-ups in this game. You can collect more bombs, some extra lives, and you can also collect two little side helicopters that act as a shield and also fire at the sides. I didn't find anything that powered up your attack, but I'm sure it's in this game somewhere. The game seems to kind of want you to be in the middle of the screen. Everything sort of draws you that way. It's also a lot easier to kind of avoid what's going on and catch the enemies sort of napping once they show up on the screen, since they don't fire right away. You'll also notice that your bullets don't go very far. They're not going to go all the way across the screen, whereas the enemy shots will go all the way across the screen. They're a little bit slower, but because your ship is so hard to move around, they can sneak up on you pretty quick. Your bullets only travel about 2/3 of the screen, so this kind of encourages you to move around and stay in the middle of the screen in some ways. You also have to deal with having a pretty big hitbox. Most of the sprites in this game are fairly large, but it becomes really annoying in the later stages where the enemies get a little bit smaller and you are still having to deal with a lot of stuff in this. You do have a very large projectile though, so that kind of helps you out quite a bit, but man, does it get annoying when you're playing this. Like other arcade games, you can only get hit once, which isn't that much of a problem. But the biggest issue is you don't have any continues. So you lose your 3 lives and then you need to start all over. There's no code for you to jump ahead to certain levels, and there's no continue option on the main screen. Even having 3 continues in the game would have been nice, but those just aren't here, which is kind of a problem with this. Overall, the gameplay is fine. It isn't as bad as some of the other games, and it does have a lot of the same problems as many other arcade ports. Tiger-Heli was an attempt to bring the arcade experience to the home, and I think they did that for better or worse. I do want to point out that this was an arcade game, and I probably should have checked before I started writing this, but regardless of that, it doesn't really change a whole lot with this review. It should have had some changes made to it when it was brought to the home console, which just didn't happen with this. Tiger-Heli looks like an average NES game. There really isn't anything that stands out to me. The graphics aren't terrible, and there were some quality of life things that were done, especially with the enemy projectiles. You know you're playing a bad shoot 'em up when you can't tell where the enemy bullets are or when they blend into the background. Tiger-Heli doesn't have this problem, as a lot of the bullets are going to be flashing yellow and red, and you're going to see where the enemies are trying to line up their shots as they swivel their turret around. It's pretty easy to avoid the enemy bullets at times, especially if you catch them right when they pop up on the screen, But if you don't, it can be a little bit of a problem due to just how sluggish your movement is. Having the backgrounds like this, where they're gray and green and blue, helps a lot of the enemy projectiles to stand out, which really helps out a lot. You're not going to see something like with 1942 where the bullets are small and they blend in with the background. I did mention this with gameplay, but you can't move everywhere on the screen. There's an invisible barrier at the top that prevents you from going all the way up there. This is kind of annoying when you're trying to avoid bullets, and it looks like you should have a little bit more real estate to kind of avoid them when they're coming up at you, and then you just run into this invisible barrier. It's a little annoying. Overall, nothing really stands out from a graphical standpoint with this. You do have the same sprite flickering and slowdown with other NES games, but that's pretty much standard, and you should almost expect that when you're playing an NES game. If possible, I would probably look for the arcade port, as that's probably a better looking game than this. This was one of the games that my brother rented a few times when we were growing up. For some weird reason, he always picked the rental games, and I never really had a choice in the matter. Probably because I was the younger brother, and my opinion didn't really matter all that much. I think he thought this game was Tiger-Heli. I might be remembering it wrong, but he was really interested in saying Tiger-Heli. Probably because when you're 7 or 8, you think hell is a really bad curse word, so you try to say that one a lot. It wasn't a game that really stood out to me, and if it wasn't a game that we had rented, I probably would never have played it, and I definitely would not have gone back and tried to experience the game again. This is a game that I looked for when I started collecting games, because at first I tried to get all of the NES games that I owned, and that was a short list, so then I went after the games that we had rented, or I remember renting when I was little, or the games that I remember borrowing from my friends when I was younger. And yeah, Tiger-Heli happened to be one of those. It isn't really all that memorable when I look at all of the other shooters that I have played over the years, or even the other shooters that I've played recently, say in the last 5 to 10 years or so. Like I mentioned before, it's just kind of one of those average games that you might remember renting when you're a kid, or you don't, and you don't really realize what it is until you see it decades later, and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. Anyway, that's a few of my memories about this. It just sort of blends in with all the other shooters that we rented, like Iron Tank and I think Jackal as well. There were a lot of those games, and the ones that I played with my friends, like 1942. But yeah, it's not really it's not really anything special. I'll just move on to my final thoughts before I keep repeating myself. This is a fine game. It can be fun in short bursts, but it just isn't going to be anything that you're going to write home about, or it's probably not going to be anything that would make it onto a best of list for me. It is a fun game, and it sort of shows what Nintendo was trying to do by bringing arcade games to the home console. That's what a lot of home consoles tried to do in the 80s, and this really wasn't any exception to that. It just didn't quite make for a fun NES game. Nostalgia played a big part in a lot of the shooters that I played, and that's why I think something like 1942 or Stinger are a little bit better than this one. Especially with 1942, where both games are vertical scrolling shooters, and they're fairly basic for what they are. However, I have more memories of playing 1942, and that one just felt like a more fun game when I went back and revisited that one. And then Stinger just was a better game overall. It has a few perspective shifts, the power-up system is a lot better, and I think it just had a lot more charm than what Tiger-Heli did. This is one of those games that I remember playing, and that's really about it. Before this, I really couldn't tell you a whole lot else, aside from you fly a helicopter and you shoot stuff. That's pretty much it. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments section below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.